Tariff turmoil, Trump, courts, and the real chaos behind the headlines. The scene is set, but the storm has been brewing for years. The political climate was already electric, partisan lines drawn deep, with fierce debates over America's place in the global economy. Rallies echoed with chants of "America First," while critics warned of isolation and economic fallout. In the imposing halls of justice, lawyers face off against government attorneys, tension thick in the air. At stake, billions in trade, presidential power, and the fate of American businesses. This is no longer a political debate, it's a legal war. The decisive battles are happening now, in courtrooms far from campaign rallies. The core question: did the president overstep his authority? It began with Trump's bold tariffs on China, aiming to protect American jobs and industries. The announcement sent shockwaves through Washington and Wall Street alike. The method: economic warfare, sending shockwaves through global supply chains. Overnight, markets tumbled, and uncertainty gripped investors. Some cheered the tough stance, others saw a reckless gamble risking a global trade war. In Iowa, farmers gathered at town halls voicing fears as soybean prices collapsed. In Detroit, auto executives scrambled to recalculate costs as imported parts became more expensive. Companies faced soaring costs, farmers lost export markets, and the economy was thrown into turmoil. In one dramatic moment, a major electronics manufacturer announced thousands of layoffs, blaming the tariffs for shrinking profits. Meanwhile, small business owners shuttered stores as supply chains broke down and prices soared. Now, the storm has moved from the Oval Office to the courthouse. Thousands of lawsuits claim the administration broke the rules and exceeded its power. In one high-profile case, a coalition of importers argued that the tariffs were imposed without proper congressional approval, setting the stage for a landmark legal showdown. Today, August 3, 2025, the legal system is finally delivering its verdict on one of the most consequential economic policies in decades. What the courts decide could change everything. So let's get to the facts. It started with Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, giving the U.S. Trade Representative power to respond to unfair trade practices. The Trump administration used this aggressively, launching tariffs after finding China guilty of intellectual property theft. This was the opening shot in a rapidly escalating trade war. China retaliated, and the U.S. doubled down, expanding tariffs to hundreds of billions in imports. The administration argued this pressure would force China to negotiate, but businesses were caught in the crossfire. The legal fight centers on whether the administration followed the rules, specifically the Administrative Procedure Act. Companies argued the government failed to give proper notice, ignored public comments, and exceeded its authority. The law allows targeted responses, not an open-ended trade war. Plaintiffs say the administration cut corners in its rush to punish China. That's the heart of the legal battle. This brings us to the heart of the matter, the court decisions. The United States Court of International Trade became ground zero for thousands of companies challenging the List 3 and 4A tariffs. Earlier this year, the court ruled the Trump administration failed to adequately explain its reasoning for expanding tariffs. The government didn't sufficiently respond to warnings from businesses about economic harm. The court didn't strike down the tariffs, but demanded a better explanation. This opened the door for companies to seek billions in refunds. The government appealed, and now the case sits before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. The government argues for broad executive authority. Businesses demand accountability. The Federal Circuit's decision will either uphold the lower court, strengthening the business's case, or validate the government's broad use of tariff power. The stakes have never been higher. How has the Trump team responded? With fire and fury, Trump frames the lawsuits as attacks on his signature policy and presidential authority. He calls the legal challenges a disgrace, accusing judges of undermining his America First agenda. At rallies, he claims, "China was stealing our jobs, I stopped it. Now lawyers want to give it all back." For Trump, this is political warfare, not just legal wrangling. His team argues the president must have flexibility to respond to economic threats. If the president's hands are tied by endless procedures, we lose the ability to negotiate, says a former official. Publicly, they rally support and delegitimize the legal process. Privately, they argue for broad executive power in court. The message: the president had the authority, and the courts shouldn't second-guess complex trade decisions. This aggressive stance ensures the fight will be bitter to the end. The battle is as much about politics as it is about law. Why should you care? Because this is about more than tariffs. This case tests the limits of presidential power and the non-delegation doctrine, how much authority Congress can give the president. The outcome will shape how future presidents use economic tools in foreign policy. A win for the government could embolden future administrations. A win for businesses would reaffirm legal limits on executive power. The precedent will affect trade policy, consumer prices, and the balance of power for years. Billions of dollars are at stake for American companies and the Treasury. For businesses, a win means potential refunds and reinvestment. For the government, a loss means a major financial hit. But above all, this is a fight over the rule of law and the balance of power in our democracy. There's a lot of talk about the Supreme Court, but it's not involved yet. The case is before the Federal Circuit. The Supreme Court hasn't agreed to hear it. All eyes are on the Federal Circuit's upcoming decision. If the government loses, it will likely appeal to the Supreme Court. If businesses lose, they'll do the same. The ultimate question: did Congress give the president broad authority for an escalating trade war, or was it more limited? The Supreme Court could set the ground rules for executive power in the 21st century. As of August 3, 2025, the tariffs remain in legal limbo, billions in refunds hang in the balance, and the Trump team remains defiant. The Supreme Court looms as the likely final stop. This is a collision of law, politics, and economics. What happens next will define the Trump legacy and the power of the presidency. The stakes are enormous. We'll be watching. As America's tariff saga unfolds, the world isn't just watching, it's reacting. Major economies like China, the European Union, and Canada have responded with their own tariffs, tit for tat, escalating what began as a domestic policy into a full-blown trade standoff. In Beijing, officials denounce what they call economic bullying, while quietly accelerating efforts to diversify supply chains away from the US. European leaders warn that the transatlantic alliance is under strain, with businesses on both sides facing uncertainty and rising costs. Meanwhile, developing nations find themselves caught in the crossfire, forced to choose sides or scramble for new markets as global trade routes shift. The World Trade Organization, already struggling to mediate a fractured global order, calls for restraint and dialogue. But with trust eroding and trade volumes dipping, the stakes aren't just economic, they're geopolitical. Allies question America's reliability, rivals sense opportunity, and the global trading system teeters on the edge of a new era. The international response makes clear, this isn't just America's fight. The consequences of tariff turmoil ripple far beyond US borders, reshaping alliances, industries, and the rules of global commerce for years to come. As the dust settles on the current standoff, the world stands at a crossroads. What happens next? Experts offer a spectrum of possible futures, some hopeful, others cautionary. One scenario sees a breakthrough at the negotiating table. Under mounting pressure from businesses and consumers, leaders might broker a new trade agreement, dialing back tariffs and restoring predictability to global markets. This path could usher in a renewed era of cooperation with reforms to international trade rules that address modern challenges. But there's another more uncertain road. If tensions persist, the global economy could fragment into rival trading blocs. Countries may double down on protectionism, favoring regional alliances over global ones. Supply chains, once seamless, could splinter, raising prices and stifling innovation worldwide. Some experts warn of a third disruptive possibility, that ongoing disputes trigger a deeper crisis of confidence. Financial markets could reel, unemployment might rise, and political divisions could deepen, not just in the US but around the globe. Yet, amid the uncertainty, there are also voices of optimism. Economists note that past trade conflicts have sometimes sparked much-needed reforms and innovation. The current turmoil could drive nations to invest in new technologies, diversify economies, and build more resilient systems for the future. One thing is clear, the choices made today will shape the world for generations. Whether through compromise or confrontation, the outcome of this tariff saga will leave a lasting imprint, not just on economies, but on the very fabric of international relations.